Okay, this is our third uh, little mini lecture on the comparison between Western knowledge and Western science and indigenous knowledge. And the previous two uh, installments in this section on Western science dealt with universal truth and rationality. And I think that the last, I should say the last, because I'm sure that people can find more, but one of the uh, other values that is the basis for Western science is what we would call materialism. And oftentimes in today's world, when we talk about materialism, we talk about it from the perspective that this person is very materialist, meaning that they're very into owning things, that they want to have things. Or we live in a materialist society where a person's judged or their value is determined by their relationship to material objects. Well, that's a form of materialism. It's also probably more appropriately defined as consumerism. But materialism is a philosophy. And materialism is a philosophy that says essentially that the only thing that is real is things that have matter, things that consist of matter. And so as you're looking at, we got these pictures here in front of us, these three pictures here, the rocks, the trees, and this alpine lake with the clouds. Materialist perspective of this is just that. This what you see is what you get. It's in opposition to a spiritual perspective, which may be different. There may be a different way of defining relationships and even describing what these things are if you look at spiritual um, values as well as material values. But materialism as a philosophy means that if something does not have matter, does not consist of matter, it does not exist. And this was one of those things where, Galileo um, is supposed to have said if you can't measure something, going back to the mathematical description of the world, if you cannot measure something, it does not exist. And so you can see where this can really throw people into some kind of conflict and controversy with the church during that time, because the church based in faith and based in spirit. And how do you measure spirit? You can't see it. It does not have matter. Although we have to back up and say maybe now, in the 21st century, some of our advanced quantum physicists have been working with advanced quantum theory and have come up with ways of showing that spirit may actually have a material aspect to it. But if we just simply look at atoms and molecules and look at the substance of this earth, um, the spirit isn't a part of it. Or you can have that perspective. I should say you can have the perspective if you just look at the atoms, the molecules, and the substance of this earth. You can look at it in such a way that there is no spirit, and that's a materialist perspective. And so when we look at the materialist perspective, we see that everything then becomes focused on the idea of matter and the interaction of material objects. The measurement and description of those objects becomes the basis for knowing the world. And so what we end up having then is this materialist perspective combined with rationality and combined with a universal search for universal truth. And these three things are essentially the basis for what we would now call Western science. So you add to that this idea of progress being a basic value and privileging theoretical knowledge, and then all of a sudden we start to see that knowledge doesn't exist simply to describe the world or simply to work within the world. It becomes a tool by which the world is manipulated. This manipulation is one of those things that when we put it into context of our readings for this week or for this module, we find that that manipulation is the kind of thing that is causing some of the problems in our society in terms of environmental degradation and the degradation of the quality of life for humans and animals. There's another aspect also of Western philosophy and science that's really important that we have to talk about just for a couple of minutes, and that's the concept of anthropocentrism. And anthropocentrism is a huge mouthful of words, but basically it comes down to this. When we use the word centrism, we're talking about the center. And so when you think of somebody as being egocentric, we think of them being self-centered. You know, they're saying things like the world revolves around me, you know, nothing starts till I get there, you know, all the things that we see from people who tend to think that the world revolves around them. We call them egocentric. So they're the center of the world. Ethnocentric in some ways is very the same way, except the same thing, except we're looking at it through the lens of the ethnic group. So somebody will say, well, my ethnic group is the best, the brightest, the strongest, and everybody else is just kind of superfluous, and we can live without these people, and it's just us. Well, when we talk about anthropocentrism, we're talking about human-centered, meaning that the whole focus is about what human beings do. And there's very little discussion about what's our relationship to the rest of the world. This anthropocentrism comes out of Genesis, the book of Genesis, which is, by the way, the shared creation story of all the Abrahamic religions. That includes Judaism, the Jewish people, Christianity, the Christians, and Islam, all of the Muslims. So this is a huge number of people in this world who have the same creation story that places human beings at the center of all things. And this is another aspect of that's kind of one of those philosophical things as part of what drives Western science. Human beings have the right to control the natural world. Human beings have the power, we have the mind, and we will use our scientific method and mathematics as a basis not only to describe the world, but beginning in the 19th century, we began to manipulate the world. We began to design machines that will change the face of the world. We design processes for making things, things as a steel and plastics, and and now in the 21st century, we're looking at recombining genes using the knowledge that we have through math and the scientific method and this reductionist approach to manipulate the genetic makeup of plants and animals for our benefit and not necessarily for the benefit of the whole world. So these things here are the primary foundation for Western science and its development over the years. Western science is from the West. It's Eurocentric, comes from Europe, spreads to the United States, but also spreads throughout the world through the colonization process by which the West made it a very, very important part of the colonizing process to educate people in the colonies in the ways of the West, including the scientific method. So these ideas about science and progress and materialism and rationality are now in place all over the world because of the colonization process. This concludes our little bit of discussion of Western science. The next installments will be looking specifically at indigenous knowledge.